Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Adoption Month webinar presented by the U.S. Children's Bureau in collaboration with Child Welfare Information Gateway and AdoptUSKids. My name is Kate Hurt, and I'm the Senior Director of Capacity Building and Engagement with AdoptUSKids. And before we get started, I'll just go over some brief reminders. This webinar will be 90 minutes long, and there will be time at the end for questions from the audience. We are recording this webinar, and we'll share this recording with you and make it available on our websites. Your phone lines will be muted, so please send us any questions you have using the questions pod. Please also use this functionality if you are having any technical difficulties, and we will assist you with that. And finally, please take a moment at the close of the webinar to evaluate this session. You will receive an email shortly after the webinar closes from AdoptUSKids Evaluation. We greatly value participant feedback, and we use this data to improve our future events. So thank you in advance. I now have the pleasure of introducing June Dorn, National Adoption Specialist with the U.S. Children's Bureau.
Thank you so much, Kate. And good afternoon, everyone. I want to extend a warm welcome from the Children's Bureau, and thank you for joining our 2020 National Adoption Month webinar today. I hope this focus on engaging youth will provide some important insights for you as you hear the voices of youth and their workers, as well as that of a young adult that experienced foster care prior to being adopted and now works in the child welfare system herself. Now we'll taking a look at some FCARS data. I hope that many of you have had the opportunity to view the recently released 2019 FCARS data, but we wanted to highlight some good news today regarding this information, as I know it reflects the good work you are all doing across the nation. First, there has been a decrease in the number of children in foster care. It's down 10,000 from the prior year. And the really good news of special note is that adoptions again increased in 2019 to 66,000. So we're up 3,000 over the prior year. And this same 3,000 is reflected in the number of children waiting is 3,000 fewer than the year before. So that is very good. On the next slide, it shows, our focus still needs to be on teens and highlight older teens that are in care. As 1 in 5 youth waiting are teens. And only 5% of those that are adopted were between the ages of 15 and 18 years of age, even though they represent 11% of the youth in care. Also, something we continue to look on and focus and work on is the fact that average time in care is 31 months. So that is something we continue to always try to decrease that number. But thank you all for the work that you do, especially with trying to improve our adoption numbers each year. Now, I would like to turn this over to Erin Bader of the Child Welfare Information Gateway.
Thank you, June. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Bader, and I am the Adoption Strategic Consultant for Child Welfare Information Gateway. The AFCARS data that June just reviewed shows why our efforts for National Adoption Month each year, as well as the Adoption Call to Action and the All-In Foster Adoption Challenge, are so important. As June said, our theme this year is Engage Youth, Listen and Learn. In our pursuit of permanency for older youth, it is imperative that we as professionals partner with each young person to create a plan that is best suited to their needs, interests, and future goals. This webinar will emphasize the importance of engaging youth in permanency planning and provide more advanced knowledge about how to incorporate youth voice into practice. As you will see in all of the National Adoption Month resources, our intent is to provide you with strategies and information as to how to successfully and authentically engage youth in every aspect of child welfare practice, but specifically in permanency planning. But first, I want to talk about the benefits of youth engagement. First of all, the only way we can align the child welfare system with its intended purpose and values is for professionals to remain focused on providing supportive and empowering services based on each individual's needs. We cannot know what youth need if we aren't including them in conversations. Youth and family engagement should not be a one-time or occasional practice, but rather should be standard operating procedure. We will be more effective and impactful in our work if we partner with children, youth, and families. Specifically, in our efforts to achieve permanency for older youth, every young person deserves the chance to influence and guide the selection of their family and determine what permanency looks like for them. Young people benefit greatly from this partnership, but so does the individual worker as well as the larger workforce and system. So I'm going to highlight a few benefits, and you'll see them outlined on the next two slides as well. So starting with the workforce and the systemic benefits. So as we all know, there's been a lot of discussion about reimagining the child welfare system lately. Well, it's a good thing that youth offer fresh new ideas, energy, and a passion to create change. By listening to and incorporating ideas of young people, the programs and services offered will be more efficient, effective, and responsive to youth needs. Secondly, research shows that quality child welfare programs are built in collaboration. Zeldin says, youth participation is held to be a marker of quality within interventions involving young people. It is framed as an issue of social justice, a platform for positive development, a human right, and a strategy for nation building. Additionally, working with youth can help recenter professionals in their own work and help them feel more committed and energized. Two minds are better than one. The youth's lived experience and expertise combined with the professionals' training and education promotes stronger decision-making, especially when we're making permanency decisions. Most importantly, for our permanency efforts, youth engagement helps ensure that young people find families with the capacity to meet their needs and provide them a loving and stable home environment. Adoptive matches will be stronger because young people know how to talk about permanency and what recruitment and matching would be most effective for them. And lastly, young people can encourage participation from their peers, and together they can help create a system that more accurately addresses the needs of young people. Next slide, please. We know that youth engagement leads to a more efficient and effective workforce and services, but there are also great benefits for the young people. So youth engagement offers critical benefits to brain development and provides valuable skills. It leads to better outcomes for young people as they enter adulthood. It fosters a sense of belonging and connectedness, which is something that all of us as humans need. And it helps youth learn how to be in healthy, supportive relationships. Next slide. So now I want to quickly go through a few of our National Adoption Month resources. So the first one is the National Adoption website. And on the website, just to highlight a few of the pages, we have a section for child welfare professionals, which includes tips and website resources that help you address barriers to youth engagement. And within that child welfare professionals section, we also have a brand new page about the adoption call to action, which highlights the work of 4 states who have chosen to focus on youth engagement and older youth permanency in their active plans. And then we have a section for legal professionals, as well as a section about grantee resources, which highlights the resources from the Children's Bureau adoption grantees, and it helps you apply their information directly to your youth engagement work. And you will see that we also have a section for youth, which helps them identify how they can get more involved in their case or on a systems level. And then the Voices of Youth section features narratives and videos that capture youth voice and talks about how family is important to them. So in addition to the website, we have the NAM podcast, which we interviewed 2 states, again, in regards to their ACTO work. So we interviewed the Ohio Permanency Roundtable Project and then the Washington Youth Directed Profiles. And some of you may have seen the Belonging Matters Helping Youth Explore Permanency tip sheet from last year. We interviewed young people who had been adopted from foster care as well as aged out, and talked with them about common barriers or hesitancies that youth might have in exploring permanency. And lastly, there is a link for the Engaging Youth in Writing Their Narratives webinar that was held this summer and hosted by AdoptUSKids. So if you download the PowerPoint from the handouts, you can click through all of these links and have access to those resources. So I am now going to hand it off to Kate.
Thanks, Erin. Well, I am super excited to kick off this next part of our webinar, which will allow us the opportunity to hear from one of our newest AdoptUSKids Speakers Bureau members, followed by a 2-part conversation between a young person and their worker to answer some of the questions you all submitted to us. Before we get going, we'd like to do a quick poll just to get a lay of the land. The poll question is, what level of youth engagement does your agency currently practice? You can select none, youth are not involved, minimal, youth are sometimes engaged and provide input, moderate, we mostly include youth, but we can do more, maximum, we empower and incorporate youth voice. Of course, if none of these apply, if you're not in a position where this would apply, you do not need to vote, or if you have another answer that doesn't apply, you can also put that in the questions pod and we will review that. I'm going to give it just a few moments for everyone to answer. All right. So it looks like the vast majority of you are moderate. You mostly include youth, but can do more. So I'm glad you are all here today to listen to and learn from the panelists we have featured. Okay, time to get to it. I'll hand it over to Erin to introduce our first guest.
Great, thank you. The bulk of our time on today's webinar will be spent hearing directly from young people about why youth engagement matters and how professionals can successfully partner. Our first speaker is Amber Smith, and she is a member of the AdoptUSKids Speakers Bureau. Amber, thank you for joining us today, and could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Amber Smith, and as you had said, I'm part of the AdoptUSKids Speakers Bureau. I also aged out of foster care whenever I was younger. I had come into the foster care system when I was 15 and was adopted at 19, actually, after aging out. And then now I am a child welfare specialist in Oklahoma, and I work with Child Protective Services. So, yeah.
Thank you, Amber. We are so happy that you are here with us today. And so let's just get right into it. The first question I would pose to you is, how were you engaged in your case plan? And what did your worker or workers do that was most helpful for you?
Of course. So whenever I first came into the foster care system, like I said, I was 15 years old, and I had two younger siblings that were 10 and 1 when we came into the system. And the system is definitely different now than it was whenever I was in it. You know, probably my first two workers that I had were, they just were not as involved with me as they were the case itself. You know, it definitely felt like a lot of the time that I was just kind of a kid. And, you know, that's something that I feel like happens so easily because it's so easy for work to happen, right? Like social workers are asked to do a lot. You know, we're asked to take care of ourselves so that we're mentally healthy, and then we're also asked to make sure that we're keeping the kids on our caseload safe. And that's just a lot. Plus you add in all the other things that happen in life. And so as a teenager coming into the system, I definitely felt that from my first two workers. And that kind of developed into a lack of trust for the system. I was placed with my adoptive family whenever I was 15, and my siblings were placed separately. And my third worker, my third and final worker that I got, really was the difference maker in my experience and my perspective of the child welfare system. You know, when she became involved, I was 17. I was getting close to graduating, and I had just, my parents' rights to me had just been terminated. And so she came in and she was just very honest with me. She didn't ask me to like her right away, right? Like whenever we meet with a kid, we always want to put our best foot forward. And she was just very straightforward with me. She was like, you know, I don't expect you to like me. I know that you don't like me. And here's why I'm gonna respect you and honor you and include you in this process regardless of that. And for me, that was a real turning point. Because even though she, you know, was only trying to do her job, like she did not treat me differently or, you know, discredit me or try to leave me out of the process because of my attitude towards the child welfare system. And so some things that she did that were just really phenomenal that I try to use in my own practice as a social worker now is, you know, she made the expectations very clear from the beginning. She told me how I could get a hold of her. You know, it was always as easy as just sending her a text message. And I always knew that even if she was busy, that I would get a response at some point. You know, I was never worried that she was gonna just forget about me. She was very honest about what to expect from her, you know, and she was very honest that she was a busy woman. And I knew that. And I came to respect that, you know, that like I wasn't the only teen on her caseload. But she did a lot of things that were special for me in that, for example, a lot of times I think it's easy for workers to accidentally make kids kind of feel like they are not in the loop. So with my first couple workers, I always felt like they were having like secret conversations with my foster parents. And of course, when you're a teen that's just had your whole life uprooted, you're a little paranoid. And so it always felt like they were just hatching plans against me. But my last social worker, I never felt that way. I mean, she would have very open conversations where she would include me and my foster mom, which helped my relationship with my foster mom as well. And then towards the end of my high school career, she even went with me to tour the college campus. So, that was not something she had to do. I know she was a busy woman, and my foster mom had already planned to take the day off and drive me across the state to go see the college I wanted to attend. And but my social worker took the time out of her day to attend that with me. And it ended up being a really special day that I'll never forget. And I adore her because of that, because she really did make the whole transition from being a teenager to being an adult that was about to age out and start college, a really enjoyable time. So she was wonderful. Some other things to kind of talk about when it comes to my experience and how to apply that now that I'm a worker would be just the engagement of teens, even from the very beginning of the process when they first come into the child welfare system. When you are a kid of any age, whether it's a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old, the whole act of coming into custody is essentially losing all control of what's going on in your life. And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with because, for me, coming into custody was a really good thing, but it was also me losing like everything I had already known my whole life. And something that I think is probably pretty common, or at least from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, is that with teenagers, they don't generally feel like kids once they're coming into custody. And whether that be because they are parentified and they've got younger siblings that they've been taking care of, or whether that be, they just have experienced a lot of adult scenarios as a kid. Most of the time when we're bringing them into custody, they no longer feel like a kid. They don't have the same kind of innocent mindset that kids who don't come from trauma have. And I think sometimes, when you're bringing kids into custody, it's so easy to be like, okay, I've got to get these kids out of this situation. I know that, the experiences that they've lived are not healthy. They should just be able to be kids. And so we try to take a lot of pressure off of them, when really what that feels like in the moment is just more of a loss of control. So something that I think is really important when it comes to engaging youth is to recognize that they too are an expert on their family. That's something that here in Oklahoma, we really work hard at, is making sure that biological parents are seen as the experts of their family and that we utilize that knowledge to try to do what's best for the children and the family as a whole. And something that I think would just really make engagement efforts skyrocket would be if we also recognized kids as the expert and not as just like the children that are needing to be saved from trauma and from unsafe situations. You know, when you've lost control, the number one thing that you want is to get some kind of control back. And I think that that's why you see a lot of kids who will act out when they first come into custody. Something that would have helped me a lot when I first came into custody was I was very parentified over my two younger siblings. I felt like they were my kids. I had, you know, made sure they ate and made sure they were safe. And that wasn't my job as a 15-year-old kid, but it was all I knew how to do, and it was all I had done. And when we were removed, we were placed in a shelter and we were separated. And, you know, it was very traumatic, very upsetting, and you feel like you've lost all control. And I think that if somebody had just asked me, you know, hey, what is your baby sister's favorite toy? Or what is something that you used to do to help your baby sister go to sleep? You know, any kind of small gesture to give me back even a semblance of control over my life and over, you know, how my siblings are taken care of, I think would have started off a really good relationship between me and my child welfare worker, to really start off that trusting relationship, because that's really the number one thing when it comes to engaging youth, is just listening to them, and not just in the way that, you know, you listen so that you get to the end result, you know, because we're all here to make sure kids are safe. But really listen, and really listen so that you hear, you know, what is valuable to these youth that we're taking into custody. Is it their role as their siblings' parental figure? Is it their role as an only child, you know, and having their life uprooted? What does that look like? You know, what are their needs, and what will help make it easier for them? You know, even something as little as asking a child, like, what do you want to eat after you've taken them into custody? You know, giving them even that small thing of control can really make all the difference when you're starting that relationship with the youth that are coming into our care.
That's great, Amber. There's so much valuable information and insight that you have provided in a short period of time, and we are so thankful for that. I had another question for you, just to kind of further elaborate or reiterate why it's important to engage and listen to youth voices, why it was important for you as a young person when you were in care, and why it is important to you as a professional.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, it was important for me coming into care because the siblings were my number one thought. I mean, my siblings were my whole life, and so really just not feeling heard when it came to caring for them, I think really just set me on a path of not feeling engaged the whole process, right? Because first impressions are everything. So just starting off that system without that level of engagement, as small as it could have been, really set me on a path of not feeling any kind of trust for any part of the system, you know. And that even started with my foster parents too, you know. As much as I adored them and appreciated them for bringing me in, there was still that lack of control. And that's why it's so important now as a worker too, you know, because it gets so easy to get overwhelmed in this job. It's so easy because you've got so many people that you're trying to take care of, basically, because that's why we all do this job, is because we want to help children and we want to help families. And that's a lot of pressure, you know, to try to take care of yourself and your own family, plus the dozens of other families that are on your caseload, you know. And it's really easy to minimize the experiences of kiddos, especially when you know that their experiences have not been healthy. But even when we know that those experiences aren't healthy, those are still the experiences that they've lived and that they've built their frame of reference on. And so using their voice and their engagement is the only way for us to really listen and really understand their perspective and start to reframe their mindset, right? Because ultimately what we want at the end of everything are healthy families, whether that be biological families, foster families, adoptive families. That's what our end goal is healthy families and safe families. And we can't really start that if we don't start where the kids are already at, which is, with those experiences they've already lived. And I feel like maybe I got sidetracked if you want to reframe that question.
Oh, I don't think so at all. But the question was why it's important to engage and listen to youth voices. So did you have anything additional? I think you covered it well, but if you wanted to add anything.
No, I think we're good. Sometimes I go off on a tangent, so I just want to make sure.
Nope, this has all been so helpful, Amber. And I have one last question for you, but I also wanted to let the audience know that you can submit questions to Amber right now through the questions pod, and we're going to do the Q&A with Amber here in a few minutes. So please submit those questions, and we will get to as many as we can with Amber. So Amber, just one last question from me before we turn it over to the question and answer piece of this. So since this is the National Adoption Month webinar, I wanted to hear from you what permanency means to you. So what it meant to you specifically when you were a young person in care, and if that has evolved, if your definition or meaning of permanency has changed now as a professional, feel free to share both.
Yeah, so permanency for me is, it's very complex. I mean, and permanency looks different for everyone. As a kid, as a teenager, really, I didn't believe that anything was permanent. After coming into custody, it was like the only thing permanent was my siblings and I's relationship. And even that had changed over the course of my time in custody. And now, just looking back at my years in custody with my foster family, permanency really is, that unconditional love that comes from family, whether that be family you were born into or family that brings you in after the fact. I remember getting in trouble for the first time when I was probably 17. I got into a little fender bender and I thought I knew everything. And so I just gave the guy everything, like my social, like everything. I just gave him all of my information. He could have very easily stolen my identity. But I went home and I told my foster mom, hey, I did it. Like, I took care of it. I didn't even need to call you. All is fine. And I don't think I had ever seen her angry with me until that moment. And, she handled it so well. But automatically I was like, oh no, I have to go pack because she's going to kick me out. Like, she's mad at me. I'm gone. Like, I'm just a foster kid. I'm out of here, And so I remember the overwhelming sense of peace I felt when she came upstairs to talk to me and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, you're mad, so I've got to go, and it was after that that I really felt like a permanent fixture in the family, because she really explained, like, you're my daughter, like, I'm going to get mad at you. You see me get mad at your sisters, like, that's what family is still being there even when the going gets rough. And so I feel like that's what permanency really comes down to. It's so easy sometimes, I think, for us to not think much when we have to move a kiddo somewhere new. But in their head, kids have not quite come to that that rationalization of like, not everything is about me. Like some things, it may not be my fault I'm having to move. And so I think when we have to move placements, that's a really good chance for us to really hone in on what permanency looks like and really gauge what their definition of permanency is. Because those movements can be difficult for sure. And I was very lucky to not have any. I went to a foster home and I stayed with them up until I was a grown up, and then they adopted me after the fact. I think that those transitional periods when we're having to move children from one home to another is a really good chance for us to engage them, because that is when permanency is at its most vulnerable in terms of concepts for children, because they always feel like everything's their fault. Even as a teenager, I felt that way, like, oh no, they're gonna get rid of me because I made a mistake. So I think talking with kids about mistakes and what those look like and what those consequences are, and how a family that is your true family will not abandon you because of those mistakes. I think those conversations are really important to have with kids, especially teens.
Definitely. And I think my biggest takeaway from what you just said, Amber, is that asking them and having the ongoing conversations about what permanency and family means to them. Yeah. So Amber, we have about 10 minutes and I've got some great questions from the audience. So the first question, besides asking for sibling input or giving youth an opportunity to have input about their siblings, do you have any other suggestions on how to give a teen some control when they do feel out of control?
Yeah, definitely. So to give some teens some control, I think that there's a lot of different things that you can do that are specific to the child, right? So if they're if you're taking them to a parent visit, maybe ask them where they want to have the visit, right? Allowing them to have a little bit of control over what that visitation looks like. Something that, it really, I think, depends on what your teen values. For me, it was siblings, but some teens really value their school, right? And then when they come into our system, we have to take them away from their friends. Finding some kind of way to allow them, whether it be like a phone call to their best friend on your way to placement, or asking them what they want to eat on your way home from a 2-hour drive from your visit because they're placed far away from their home county. Just little things that make them feel like you're not calling every single shot in their life. It could even be like something like school activities. That was, whenever I was in care, I was in speech and debate. And so there was a lot of things that I would need like financial support for, or if it was like an overnight trip, there's a lot of different policies that go into getting approval for something like that. So I think just staying engaged with your youth about what is important to them and allowing them that one thing that you're going to dedicate just as much time and energy in to help them achieve as they are, can really help in giving them a little bit of sense of control.
Great advice. So the next question, Amber, is what is the best way to kind of balance making sure that the youth is being heard, but also your responsibility as a professional to kind of make decisions, even if sometimes those decisions go against what the youth is wanting? Yeah, so when we figure that out, I'll be feeling good too. Yeah, no, that's a hard one. So something that I have tried and it's worked sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, because we're all human, right? So we're always going to make mistakes. That's just
the nature of working in a human-based field. But something that I really try is just making that clear from the get-go that like there are going to be times where I've got to call the shots, right? And I want your input, and I will be honest with you about what is happening, but you may not love it. Just keeping that conversation open, I feel like is important. Because at least then they know what to expect. It's not like a betrayal when we have to make a decision that they don't like, right? Like that's something I try really hard to get established as soon as I meet a kid of any age is like, listen, you be honest with me. I want to hear what your input is and I want to hear what you have to say. And I'm going to be really honest with you too. And so, you know, what that looks like is, okay, I've got to remove, right? And a teenager's like, but we're fine. Well, I'm going to be really honest with you, right? And I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear, but I also still want your input, you know, or, well, I don't want to be placed this far away from home, but it's also the only placement we have, you know, keeping that honest conversation like, hey, I hear you. I hear why you don't want to be placed here. Here's what I can do in the future. If we have a closer placement come up, you know, we'll do that. But for right now, to keep you safe, I've got to do this. And keeping that honest conversation open helps to build that trust, even when they're mad at you. But also, that's a really good opportunity for you to kind of do something small that gives them a little control back. So even when you have to make the tough decisions that they don't like and don't agree with, those are the really good opportunities where you do the small thing, like let them call their brother or sister on the way, or like sometimes I'll let mine like make a little playlist before we leave if it's going to be like a long car ride. So I've listened to a lot of Disney songs in the car, but you know, giving them just a little bit of control in those moments where you have to do something that they don't agree with is a really good time to engage in those practices.
Thank you, Amber. I wanted to let you know that we have a few comments that have come in that are just saying thank you for sharing your story and that you are very inspirational. So wanted to share that with you. And unfortunately, we are at our allotted time. So I will echo those words of thanks for your time today, Amber. Your perspective has been so valuable and I'm sure will be helpful to all of us as professionals in our daily practice. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
So I'm now going to hand it off to Kate to continue our conversation.
Well, I echo that again. That was really incredible to hear that lived experience, and you shared such thought-provoking things. So thank you, Amber. That was really wonderful. So when we talk about youth engagement, it isn't the work that a youth does themselves or work the professional does themselves. It's the work being done together, the work within that partnership. So this next segment features youth and their workers to talk about youth engagement, illustrating just how important that partnership is. We will start with a conversation between Johnny and Gloria from the Adoption Exchange in Nevada. Johnny and Gloria were not able to be here in person today, but we have talked so much with them about their relationship, and we really wanted to capture that for you. So we have pre-recorded a conversation with the two of them, answering some of the most asked questions this year. Since it's a recording, you will notice extended pauses here and there, but the message that they share will surely be what resonates the most. So we will play that recording for you now.
Hi, my name is Gloria Torma, and I've been working with Johnny for the last year. As a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter, also known as a Connections Advocate at Raise the Future, formerly known as the Adoption Exchange, my colleagues and I use a child-specific recruitment model that is the only evidence-based recruitment program for older youth in the United States. We believe that every young person deserves to go through life confident that they have at least one caring adult by their side. So every day, we show up for youth in foster care by listening to their needs, reconnecting them with adults that they can rely on, and introducing them to new ones. Then we surround those positive adult connections with support so that they can grow into meaningful, lasting relationships that help our youth heal from the past and prepare for the future. We do this all with input from the youth that we serve, from our first interaction with them, by allowing them to tell us who and what is important to them, and continue to invite their opinions throughout our time together. Johnny, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's John, but I prefer Johnny. Some interesting facts about me is I am in 11th grade. I like to knit, crochet, color, and paint. I would love to be an emergency doctor, an ER doctor, and I just want to say thank you for having me.
Thank you, Johnny. I have loved getting to know you over the last year and really value our relationship. I really love how outspoken and honest with me you have been. It has helped me to make sure that I'm supporting you in the ways that you need and helping you find the type of permanency that is best for you. What have you found valuable from our relationship?
Some things that I have found valuable in our relationship is how open and honest you are with me, Gloria. Meaning, not babying everything that you have to say, saying like, you're telling me the stuff that I need to hear no matter what.
Thank you, Johnny. And within those honest conversations, we've talked a lot about your permanency. It's definitely not a one-time discussion between us. Achieving permanency isn't just something you should check off one day. It's a process. So conversations about what it means and how I can support you should be happening regularly. One question we got that I think all workers should be asking their youth is, what does permanency mean to you? What would your answer to that be, Johnny?
Well, what does permanency mean to me? Great question. It means having a family during the hard times, having unconditional support during the hard times and the easy times, and whatever else I need from the family that I live with. Also meaning stuff like they'll be there for me when I come home from college, and I'll be there for spring break and make me feel more like a normal teen.
Thank you, Johnny. I think that acceptance that you mentioned is something that we all need and we all deserve. Another question we got that I think we should both answer is, what benefits are there when youth are engaged in the work? Johnny, I'll let you go first.
Okay. What are the benefits of partnering with youth? Well, that's a great question too. I remember the first time I had met Gloria, we had went to Starbucks. We had got one of my favorite drinks, and we had talked about stuff I'd want in my family. Like a mom and a dad or a dad, or just a mom or just a dad, whether I'd want a phone, or I would want stuff like a cat or a dog. I remember though, I got overwhelmed and she had noticed that. So we had went to the craft store and looked around the craft store. Then we went to another store and got this big gray blanket that I sleep with every night till this day.
Thank you, Johnny. I remember that day like it was yesterday. For me, it's a fond memory of one of the ways we found to connect. And I still think of you all the time when I see different items that we talked about and played with that day. I really want to answer this next question too, because I think there are benefits to both the youth and the worker. By allowing a youth to partner in their case planning and set the trajectory of their life, you are increasing the likelihood of a successful permanent home. Youth are your very best resource. Sure, there are papers and documents, but when you get straight to the source and empower youth to inform you about who they are and what they want, That knowledge will allow you to search for a family that can best provide for the youth emotionally, physically, spiritually, educationally, and any other needs that come up. Success rates go way up when youth are partners in the work. Building positive, trusting working relationships with our youth is vital, as they must feel heard and valued to be able to express their desires and concerns to us, and for us to effectively advocate. Otherwise, we're just guessing at efforts to support their best interest. Youth who feel involved in their teams are more open and authentic in supporting their overall satisfaction and seem to be able to rebound from disappointment better as they can trust their team in the process more. It's so important to all youth, but it was especially important to Johnny to be able to understand his history, his present circumstances, and participate in his future planning, or he would have continued to be hurt by the stress and the anxiety of all of the unknown. Providing youth the opportunity to partner builds their skill set in so many ways, preparing them for adulthood, especially in learning how to advocate appropriately for themselves, compromise, and share feelings and ideas towards a common goal, which in this case would be their own personal success. As mentioned already, the benefits to me as a worker are that when my youth is engaged, I can do more effective advocacy and provide a better quality of work. Because Johnny is engaged, he can narrow down my efforts based on his expressed desires, freeing me up to pursue what he tells me is important, rather than wasting my energy going down the wrong paths. The work is also so much more rewarding when we are able to work together. It takes away that feeling of, here are the things I've done, and it creates a fun, collaborative, equal space of, here's what we're doing, here's what we're at. It creates a measure of shared accountability to each other, giving the youth influence in the relationship and direction of the case. Fortunately, Johnny has been so vocal and so honest about what he wants in a family. So together, we are working to find the family that is just right for him. One of the reasons it's so important to have regular conversations about permanency is because sometimes you just never know when or why a young person will change their mind and become open to adoption. Johnny, can you share a little bit with us about when your feelings started to change about adoption and why?
So it had been about 2 years when my feelings about adoption had changed. My caseworkers had helped me through this. They had shown me the pros and cons of everything, of each path of permanency, whether I wanted to stay in care and age out, or whether I wanted to get adopted. They'd show me the pros and cons of staying in care and the pros and cons of getting adopted. But finally, I had chosen to be adopted after many, many talks, not just one or two, many talks that we had with my caseworkers, about what they would each would look like.
Johnny has been so engaged in his own permanency goals, but it's not always easy. Many young people hear a lot of misinformation about their permanency options. They also have fears of rejection and feelings of being unheard in the past. I have spent a lot of time explaining the facts about perceived barriers like name changes, moving schools, losing college support, and other things that have caused youth to disengage from discussing their permanency plans. I have talked a lot with my youth about the notion that their lack of permanency yet was not a reflection on them, and simultaneously validated and challenged their fears of rejection by helping them reframe past experiences. For those like Johnny, who were disengaged because they felt like their voices were minimized in the past, I put extra effort into ensuring that I hear them and will advocate for them, but their commitment to me is that they must express their feelings to me for me to be able to do that well. When it gets rocky, I like to ask my youth, if they were me, what they would do for a youth in their situation. And I find that a lot of them tell me more in response to that question than if I directly ask them what they want. And sometimes I not only learn what I need to do for this youth, but I learn what I need not to do. Johnny, I'm sure that there have been things you wish a caseworker would have done differently. Can you tell us about that? Can you share some tips with us?
Some things I wish caseworkers could have done differently. Great question also. I wish they could have been open and honest with me. That could have saved me so much more frustration and anger about the system. When I finally had Gloria, she was open and honest with me and actually told me about what I wanted in my case, how my case was, and what it looked like. So I feel like a message that I have for caseworkers is to be open and honest no matter what.
So that was Gloria and Johnny, and we send them big thanks for sharing their stories with us. It is so interesting to hear that dynamic between the two of them and to hear how important openness and honesty has been, very similar to what Amber was just saying. So this next segment features a young person, Sarah, along with her worker, also named Sarah. We have allotted time at the end for audience questions, so please send those in through the questions pod as they come up. Let's start with our youth here today. Sarah, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right. I'm Sarah. I'm 17 years old. I was in foster care for 6 years before I was adopted in July. I have experience living in group homes. I've attempted reunification with my biological parents, and I've also had the unique challenge of moving cross-country during my adoption finalization. I met Sarah Phillips after I moved to North Carolina when I started attending her independent living skills group. I'm passionate about advocacy, and I'm excited to be a member on SASO's Young Adult Leadership Council in North Carolina. By sharing my story with other youth in foster care, I want to instill hope in youth who feel voiceless and unrepresented. This year, I'm attending the University of North Carolina at Asheville and intend to major in education. In my free time, I enjoy reading fantasy, playing video games, and studying Korean. I'm here today with my worker, Sarah Phillips, if she'd like to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Phillips, and I'm the Links Coordinator and Foster Care 18 to 21 social worker for Orange County Department of Social Services, located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I first entered social work with a desire to ensure that children always had access to a space where they felt loved and that they belonged. I've been in child welfare for 6 years and in my current role for 2 years. I enjoy supporting adolescents and young adults as they navigate the child welfare system while also learning what it means to be an adult. Youth and young adults who have experienced extended time in foster care are at an increased risk of negative consequences once they leave care. This includes dropping out of school, unplanned parenthood, high rates of untreated illness, homelessness, criminal activity, depression, and suicide. Our agency funds an independent living program called the Links program that partners with a foster advocacy program called SASO. SASO stands for Strong Abled Youth Speaking Out. It's a statewide association of youth aged 14 to 24 who are or have been in the out-of-home care system in North Carolina. The mission of SASO is to work to improve the substitute care system by educating the community, speaking out about needed changes, and providing support to youth who are or have been in substitute care. When Sarah moved to Orange County, she was connected to the independent living program and our agency. Sarah, when you weren't always so sure about permanency though, can you tell me what permanency means to you now?
Yeah, permanency means a lot of things to me. On paper, I think it's just this idea of a legal relationship between a youth and a parental figure. But for me, achieving actual permanency was a lot harder than just signing some papers. Permanency is the process of creating a healthy, positive, nurturing, and supportive relationship between a youth and a parental figure, and an environment which can become a place for that youth to decide who they are and what they want. And I think this difference is really important because without emotional permanency, a child can never really be certain that they want legal permanency. During my journey to permanency, there were several challenges I had to overcome, both internally and externally, in order to feel safe and ready to move towards adoption with my foster family. Once, I almost decided to leave the placement due to some severe disagreements about internet and phone usage. My family and I were able to overcome this disagreement in a safe, sane manner, which really helped me to realize that their household was a place in which I was safe to have disagreements. This is something that couldn't have been said for my biological household, and this is just one example of many instances that helped build my dynamic and my relationship with my foster parents to the point where I felt great about moving towards permanency. Even before my family and I talked about adoption, I certainly felt like I had emotional permanency in their household. This was really important because it allowed me to have a place where I didn't have to have my walls up all the time. And in turn, it was also an opportunity to learn more about myself and what I wanted. I was able to explore new interests. I made tons of new friends. My relationships improved with my teachers and other authority figures. But I think most importantly, I was super happy for once, like for the first time in a long time. And I think that all of these things are what makes permanency so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you do a great job talking about what a process it is, and how it's not just a piece of paper. You weren't always in the space to want to engage in your plan. I know you've had experiences in the past where that wasn't even being offered to you as an option. Now that you've experienced both sides of the fence, being left out of your plan, but also being fully engaged in it, what would you say about the benefits of youth engagement?
I think that there's so many benefits. I think that the youth being involved and passionate about her case plan can make for an easier job for both the youth and the worker. Seeing a youth happy and flourishing has to be encouraging for a social worker. And I know from experience that I have been much easier to work with when I am excited and happy to be involved in my case. Getting more involved in my case plan helps me represent myself in a more accurate, strengths-based way as well. And in turn, this garnered the attention of my foster family, who adopted me 2 months ago today. But more on the benefits of that, I think that there's so many. Not only can it lead to an uncrushable sense of empowerment, but I think being really involved can help ease the transition of moving into a foster home. This especially goes for kids who have been in non-traditional homes for most of their time in foster care. When a kid is involved, she will have a more accurate idea of what she can expect from her new living situation. Additionally, I think that the worker and the youth working in tandem for this process is such a good opportunity to create a rapport with each other. And this is obviously of great benefit for both the worker and the youth. The youth will feel more comfortable reaching out for support and advocating for herself, and the worker will better know how to cater to the needs of that youth. On that note, Sarah, do you see benefits from the worker's perspective for engaging youth in permanency?
Absolutely. Something that we have to be mindful of as social workers is that social workers have an inherent position of power. And for a young person who either was used to a great deal of freedom and control in their own life or no control ever, experiencing foster care, they don't have that control. So that leaves us with two possibilities. Number one, they're okay with their lack of control and they allow things to be done for them, which in turn creates young adults who are just not prepared to solve their own problems in the future just because they're used to someone else doing it for them. Or number two, they take that control back in other ways. But they'll have that control as an adult. So let's take the time to be intentional about teaching them how to use it. So if we talk with our youth about what they want, what works, what they see doesn't work, and then their voice is heard, they have a sense of control over what's going on, and they see you advocating for what they want, which helps your rapport and their trust in you. So how can you reach a compromise? We had a youth who was told by a previous social worker that she was not allowed to talk with her mom at all. And so when her current social worker found out that she was in contact with her mom, the youth at first freaked out. The social worker then sat down with her and said, hey, hold on. If you want to talk with your mom, let's talk about it. Like, she's your mom. Of course you want to talk with her. The youth was just so surprised that the social worker was willing to work with her about it. They made a plan for her to talk with her mom and to check in with the social worker about how it was going. Over time, because the social worker was willing to support contact, they were able to have ongoing conversations about what those conversations with mom looked like, what triggers were brought up during those times, and to have open conversation about the possibility of unsupervised visits, of overnight visits. The youth was empowered to come back to the social worker to say, hey, I'm not getting along with my mom right now because of XYZ. I want to see her, but I'm only comfortable doing that with our agency supervising the visit. And that's what happened. So the youth felt that she had a say. The social worker was able to advocate for her to have contact, and the youth was able to recognize that, hey, I can have my mom in my life, but I have another reliable adult in my life who can support me in ways my mom cannot, and that is okay. The youth was able to see that when the social worker did have to hold a firm line, there was a specific reason for it. And it wasn't something that the social worker was doing for the youth. It was something that the social worker was doing for the youth, not to the youth. And so additionally, not only are there benefits to the youth on learning how to advocate for themselves, like in that context, but encouraging youth and engagement in their case also lends to benefits for the workers too. I find that youth who are engaged in their plan lends to a better working relationship with less stress, even if their case plan isn't straightforward. I'd even go so far to say that it lends me to looking forward to the next time I can see my youth, because just getting to witness their growth is both an honor and a humbling experience, and it keeps me going with other youth I'm working with. But the most important benefit to workers is that when the youth is part of the planning, your efforts are well informed, and permanency is much more likely to be successful, solid, and lifelong. Sarah, I know that sometimes those conversations with youth about permanency are pretty tough. You have to relay hard truths about their case and potentially get them to think about a future that they hadn't planned for. Do you have any tips for workers when we need to have those tough conversations?
Tough can be a huge understatement sometimes, but I think that as long as the worker's main concern is with sincerity and respect, everything will go well. For example, Sarah Phillips, she doesn't look at where a kid comes from or how they've acted in the past. She treats them how she expects to be treated herself. I've thankfully had a ton of great adults in my life, and when I met Sarah Phillips, I wasn't exactly lacking in the adult support department. However, for I'd say the majority of kids in substitute care, there are a lot of opportunities for them to be treated as less than by their peers and adults in their life. This is partially due to the idea that foster care is either taboo or shameful, or that children in foster care are somehow responsible for their circumstances. However, I've never felt an ounce of anything but respect from Sarah Phillips. And I think that is what keeps a lot of kids coming back to her independent living skills group. She treats us just like any other kids, but also treats us like the young adults that we are. This is one of her biggest strengths, because then when it comes time for these really tough conversations, we know we have someone we can go to that is in our corner unconditionally, who respects us and wants to see us succeed. If you lead with sincere respect for the tough, frankly courageous youth in your care, then they will know that they can trust you. And that's the biggest thing you need to have conversations about tough subjects.
Thank you so much for saying that, Sarah. Lead with respect. I think that that's really helpful. One of the reasons conversations about permanency can be tough is because youth sometimes struggle to recognize that permanency and independence are not mutually exclusive. This is not an either or, either permanency or independence, but a both and. I have a great coworker who frames it like this. Who are you going to eat Thanksgiving dinner with? How can we as social workers support boundaries and encourage reliance on adults in their lives? We as professionals have a few options when it comes to how we talk with youth. We can respond as the referee, putting ourselves in the middle of it, calling all of the shots, or we could respond as the coach who equips the player with a playbook, maybe calls some plays to consider from the sidelines, but realizes that they aren't the ones calling the shots when there's seconds left on the clock. Maybe this looks like, yeah, I can go have lunch with this person, but I'm not going to get in a car with them, and they wouldn't be the first person I call to share good news with. I also make sure to frame it as, these years of your life, they have not been great, but let's talk about how as an adult, and even now, there's time for you to meet the people that you'll count as your people, those that you celebrate milestones with, you call to vent to, and yeah, maybe disagree on something, but you come back together. So who are you going to call when you get that job or that promotion? I try to use myself. I'm an adult, and I still call my parents when I'm not sure how to fix the outlet in my bathroom. especially for youth who've been in care for a bit. It's hard to break through that idea that, once I'm 18, everything is fine. Once you're 18, yeah, you can be more independent, but as humans, we've been made to be interdependent. No man is an island. Sarah, I'm so happy that you came around and decided not only to engage in your plan, but that you wanted permanency. I think it's helpful to ask older youth if they remember what made those feelings start to change, because maybe we can identify what helped them and explore those same things with other youth. Sarah, do you remember when your feelings started to change?
I think that's a great question, and it has kind of a long answer. My feelings about permanency began to change around my freshman year of high school, but it wasn't a straight path from being totally against it to being in absolute support of it. I think like any kid in the foster care system, I really craved permanency, even if I didn't know exactly what that entailed. My first semester of freshman year was capped off by a failed reunification attempt with my biological mother, and the day before winter break, I was removed from her home and entered the foster care system for the second time. I found myself in a temporary youth shelter, the same one I'd been placed in the year before. Often I felt angry and bitter, especially when I was attending school. I kept asking, why is a family so unobtainable for me? Was it something I had done, or was this simply a matter of fate beyond my control? And I wasn't exactly sure which option was better. And certainly seeing the typical interaction of parents and children at school was not helping my feelings of resentment towards permanency subside. However, this really started to change after two events. One I believe was entirely within my control, and one that was kind of like like fate or destiny. First, I began to attend independent living skills groups. Not only did I find a community of individuals that were just like me in these groups, I was also being taught the skills that other kids my age already knew. I was aware that I was behind in many categories: life skills, social skills, money skills, I could go on. But as I started to gain more knowledge about these topics, I felt better prepared to come to life with a better attitude. And for the first time in a long time, permanency wasn't something I was angry or bitter about, because it didn't matter to me whether I could have it or not. I realized that I could have all of the things a permanent placement could offer by offering them to myself. I knew it was going to be a lot harder, but I've always prided myself on my grit when it comes to tough situations, and I decided I was going to make my life work. Ironically, this new attitude towards permanency and life in general is what allowed me to actually find a permanent home. When I was feeling so bitter towards this idea, even if I had managed to find a home that was a good fit for me, I definitely would have self-sabotaged the relationship before it even had a chance to begin. Now with this maybe I can build it for myself outlook, when I was offered a chance at permanency, which seriously was the luckiest thing to ever happen to me, I was able to do something with it. Because in several ways, even with a safe family and home, the youth is building permanency for themselves. It takes a lot of work from both sides to build this kind of relationship, especially when youth are coming from a place of trauma, like a lot of kids in substitute care are. I know that those unresolved feelings of resentment were a major barrier for me, and independent living skills really helped me start breaking those barriers down, because it shifted permanency into something that felt attainable for me for the first time in my life. Sarah, I'm sure you've experienced lots of barriers with youth.
For sure. It's pretty rare to meet a youth who doesn't initially present some sort of barrier to engaging in their own permanency. For some youth who have been accustomed to the child welfare system being in their life, they're used to not getting a voice. And so they tend to approach things in a, why does it matter if I say anything, because I'm not going to get it anyway kind of attitude. In my role, to overcome that barrier, I can come alongside them to say, all right, so what's important? What prevents you from asking? Is it a lack of knowing how to ask, or is it apathy? From there, we can figure out which way to address things. I would have a young adult get really angry about the decisions that the agency had to make. And when he was yelling at me, he would always pause and he'd go, I'm not mad at you, Miss Sarah. I'm mad at the agency. But in reality, sometimes it's hard to separate those two things out. So it's important to recognize that what we want is young people to be connected to supportive adults. And no one says that has to be you, the social worker. So maybe someone can't live with a relative, but does the youth have a relationship with the relative that they could advocate for them? By resetting expectations I had of the youth and asking them to set expectations of me, we were able to really change our working rapport. For the youth I work with, that looked like respecting their privacy by talking about the goals they have and letting them take the lead and letting them know where they have the option to say, I'm not going to answer that. And I won't press for an answer unless there are clear and apparent safety issues there. It also comes in asking questions like, what can I be doing to support you in this? Are you calling because you want guidance, or do you want to vent about this? Because then you're giving them more control about what they're doing. This might sound obvious too, but remember little details. When I was in high school, I had a youth group leader who admitted that she didn't have the best memory. So every week she'd go home and write down something that she learned about someone that she talked to, and then she'd look over her notes before the next youth group meeting. Is there a way that you could glance over your notes? Or if you keep a face sheet, maybe there's a space for you to put notes about the things you know that they like, what their favorite candy is, what their favorite fast food is, stuff like that. Lastly, recognize that relationships don't happen without regularity. So how do you develop rapport with anyone? Find some kind of common ground, whether it be the most recent movie they saw or a TV show. I always ask about a Netflix recommendation because it also lets you know what they're watching too. Sports, etc. For young people, my main go-to is probably music. Young people are more likely to talk when they don't have to maintain eye contact, so driving is quite frankly the best. I have Spotify Premium, so most typically whenever we're going somewhere, I ask them to DJ and I start talking with them about their music choices. The next step is being intentional about learning things that they like. If they tell you they like a certain artist or a certain album, can you take 20 minutes to listen to some of that music while you're typing something up? Then later you're able to go back and say, hey, I listened to that album and you're right, that one song is awesome, but the other song is way too slow. If music isn't your thing, then find another in. I know that Sarah and I have had many conversations about different board games, different books, and Netflix recommendations. I'm almost done, Avatar. This works for me because, though, this is my personality. If this would seem forced coming from you, recognize and own that. I think the other part of things that's really important in the work that I do with young people is that young people can sniff out authenticity like a sixth sense. So if part of what I'm doing here is encouraging young people to be genuine to themselves, I have to demonstrate that with myself. Although I've managed to learn a lot of different strategies that work, we've all made mistakes before. Like Gloria, I think it's helpful to hear about what we did right and what we could have done differently. Sarah, are there things that you wish case managers would do differently?
Yes, like a million times yes. Something that has really been on my mind lately and was probably the most consistent issue I had when I was in the system had to do with the number of social workers I had. I had countless social workers, and this is no fault of them. This is a job with a really high turnover rate. However, there was an issue that was kind of overarching over all of this, and this was how the case transference was handled. Every time my case was transferred to a new social worker, I felt like I was starting over from square one. I had to re-explain my wants, needs, goals, and everything about me to each new social worker every time my case was transferred. This was becoming increasingly difficult to do, not only because each time there was more and more story to tell, but also because I knew that in a few months I would be getting a new social worker anyways. There was no incentive for me to want to build that relationship. I think something that could have been really helpful to me during these transitional periods was if there was some sort of standardized guidelines for how cases need to be transferred. Maybe both social workers, the new and the old, could have sat down with me and we could have all gone over my case together as a team. Instead of this, I kind of felt like a prop being handed around on a stage. To me, adding this step during case transference seems like a little more effort than it would to simply hand off the papers to the new social worker. Not only would an easier transition be beneficial for my mental health, but it would also have been beneficial for my case's timeline. My adoption took a long time to complete because every time my case got transferred, I would find my wants on the back burner to a kid who has been in the social worker's workload for longer. or documents would end up lost somehow. The social worker would be confused on what the next steps in my plan were, and on and on and on. So much of the tension and strife I experienced during my time in foster care happened during these periods of transition. And I think working to make them easier for both the youth and the new social worker would be really ideal and beneficial. But moving on to the things that really, really helped me on a more positive note, one of the most beneficial resources my social worker ever connected me to was my court-appointed social advocate or CASA worker. While both my previous social workers and the judge working on my case were too busy or too disconnected to really know my needs, my CASA worker met with me weekly to get to know me so she could help me represent myself in court. Finally feeling like I had someone who was in my corner unconditionally was one of the things that really jump-started my interest in my own case. And the other thing that I really like to bring up that was really important to me was being connected to my local independent living services program, similar to the one that's run by Sarah Phillips in North Carolina. This program taught me all the things that are normally taught by parents over several years. This included simple skills like how to fold laundry and more complex things like how to manage money. Things that are taught with kids in permanent homes over several years, I was a fish out of water playing a catch-up game with. And I knew that too, and I was really trying hard to get back to a sense of normalcy socially and mentally with my peers. Personal hygiene was a really big one that I don't see talked about a lot. I mean, I was in high school and I barely knew how to take care of myself because no one had ever taught me about these things. But I realized that with the skills I was learning, it would be okay if I never made it into a better placement. However, it also empowered me to try harder than ever to work on my case plan and hope that I could make it into a better placement.
Yeah. Obviously, as the coordinator for an independent living program in North Carolina, I'm a huge advocate for all youth getting involved in a program like this. One important reason, which I know is often a huge concern for youth and potential families, is so young people are well informed about the different educational benefits available to them. It's important to be confidently knowledgeable about your state's resources and benefits based on the type of exit from care. If you don't know, then find someone who is that you can loop in or that you can learn from. It's important to talk with youth about their hopes and dreams up to and beyond a high school graduation. It may not be a typical college path they have in mind, as education up until that point may have been something hard that they never really believed that they'd actually be able to accomplish. It's also important to recognize that there are so many options out there for workers to explore in order to help young people access those benefits. While state-to-state resources differ, there's federal support as youth adopted at 16 or older qualify for education and training vouchers, or ETVs. Explore the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, with your youth. That opens for next year tomorrow. Any young person who spent even one day in foster care after the age of 13 qualifies for a number of financial resources, even if they are legally adopted before starting college. There are many scholarships for youth adopted from foster care. Reach out to the university or college where your youth wants to go. See if there are tuition supports available. Bottom line, there are so many resources to explore for youth legally adopted from foster care. Don't give up looking for them. Lastly, it's important to be able to recognize when the loss of educational benefits impacts permanency so that we as social workers can go to the macro level. We can go to our state and our federal partners to be able to advocate for changes on those levels to address, hey, this is creating a space of dissonance for our young people. What can be done to change that?
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah, such incredible information sharing. This has been a real treat to have such helpful suggestions from the workers and to learn so much from our young people. So we want to pivot a little. I know we promised you some time for audience questions at the end. We are running close to the end, but we do want to allow at least one question from the audience. So I'm going to hand it over to Erin. She's been tracking those to pull out a question.
All right, so Sarah and Sarah, I think you both kind of briefly addressed this in one of your responses, but do you have anything additional to add for this question? What are strategies to include youth whose trauma may lead them to push away families or connections? So push away those families with their words or their behaviors. who are wanting to be supportive and committed. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is Sarah Phillips. I totally see how trauma always impacts that ability, and I think that when it comes to that, as social workers, we just have to continue to support those supportive people to be able to recognize that, to be able to recognize where that is coming from, and to sit with them in that, to say, this is really hard and I understand these things, but at the same time to, like, you know, I'm going to be here. And then also having to hold that balance of, you know, I want to be here and I want to respect this, but at the same time too, recognizing that people have limits, but then being able to go back to say, hey, you know, if that's the case, if, you know, if you're saying mean things, or if these actions that you're taking are pushing us away, and we can't, and we've tried and we tried and we tried and we can't do this, this isn't a black and white, you know, how can we as child welfare people, professionals, help to create this space to say, well, it's not all black and white. Even if this is happening, that doesn't mean that your relationship then ends if they can't reside with you. You can still support them in different ways.
Yeah, I think this is other Sarah. I think you summed it up perfectly. That's exactly what I would have said. The only thing that I would add to that is I think it's also really important to just remember that time is one of the biggest factors. You just need to have time. It's a huge adjustment, and it should take a lot of time to adjust. And I think that just keeping that in mind, like, this is going to take time, this is going to take time, and reminding your youth that that is the reality, that it's not going to happen overnight, is also a really good tool to add to their toolbox.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah and Sarah. We are just about out of time. So I really, before we go, I want to allow Sarah and Sarah to share their final message with the field today. Sarah Phillips, would you like to start?
Yeah. So my final message would be that, you know, turning 18, becoming independent, those are things that are likely to happen to everyone. If the young people we work with are treated as part of the team, as the captain who has the ability to call the shots and still feel respected, if and when they're wrong, we'll be able to go farther. So how can we meet them where they are, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? If they don't utilize us as their coach, how can we encourage them to find someone else to do so with? We want to continue to convey to youth that permanency and independence is not either or, but a both and. Sarah, what's your final message for today?
Sarah, did you unmute yourself? Oh no, I don't think we can hear her. Sarah, can you unmute yourself? Okay, well, I don't want to end the webinar without Sarah getting to share her final message, and so I'll try to speak on her behalf. I know
Wait, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay, good.
Oh, yeah, oh, such a relief. I got like randomly disconnected. That was the worst. Okay, I'm here. I'm back. Oh.
Good. What's your final message?
Okay, my final message is this. I'm really, really passionate about advocacy, especially after becoming involved with Say So. I've been really excited about advocacy opportunities, and the idea of advocacy is one of the first things that made me excited is to be a part of my own life again. If I could recommend a single resource for workers to give to foster youth, it would be advocacy skills. And the best way to build those skills is to get involved in advocacy. In my case, it happens to coincide with my interest in the legislation of foster care and in educating the general public about foster care. but I don't think an advocacy interest has to strictly be relating to foster care to help kids in the system. Advocate for tigers or the rainforest or anything you want to. Just choose something to be passionate about and stick with it. Planting that seed of passion in yourself and watering it with sustained commitment will eventually give you a vibrant canopy of skills and resources that will be infinitely useful to you for the rest of your life. Please, please urge your youth to get involved in advocacy. They probably won't want to do it at first though, so I also recommend bribery. Usually food and/or gift cards will do the trick.
Thank you, Sarah. I was getting ready to share those sentiments on your behalf when we lost you, because I know how important advocacy has been to your permanency journey. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, I second that recommendation to get young people involved in advocacy. We are so inspired by the young people who are part of the AdoptUSKids Speakers Bureau and by our youth speakers here today. We recognize that every time a young person shares their story, they have to revisit a difficult period in their life. And that's why it's so critical that support is a steady and integrated component for any young person sharing their voice. The growth and confidence that can build in youth who use their voice to empower themselves and others is truly phenomenal. So we thank you, Aaron, Johnny, Gloria, Sarah, and Sarah for sharing with us today, for being willing to give us a glimpse into your history so we can listen and we can learn. I'll now hand it back over to Aaron to wrap things up.
Thanks, Kate. So as we are getting ready to close out the webinar, we have one last question that if you would provide your responses in the questions box. We're interested to know what additional information or resources could help you engage and empower youth voices. So again, if you have a response to that, please put that in the questions pod. And other than that, I would just like to thank you for your time and for joining the webinar today. And to remind you to visit the National Adoption Month website and specifically look at the Spread the Word section to help us spread the word and increase awareness as we get closer to November, which is National Adoption Month. Thank you so much.